when you are telling them from your experience, from 17 years of doing this work every day, from working not only in Spain, but in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in France, and knowing more than 2,000 sex workers personally, a public representative that tells you that she doesn't believe you because, doesn't fit in her narrative, given her 0 days in experience on doing this job. That's not really a meaningful participation.
Hello and welcome to Euractiv's Beyond the Byline podcast. I am Melchior, and this week we're taking a deep dive into the report on regulating sex work adopted by the European Parliament. On Thursday, 14th of September, members of the European Parliament adopted a report on the regulation of prostitution. EU lawmakers are advocating for a common European approach and framing it as gender-based violence rather than sex work. They're also urging member states to decriminalise sex work and punish but not criminalise bias. The debate has sparked confrontation between sex workers and MEPs on how to regulate the sector. But what is the report really about?
This report underlines and make clear what are the really reasons why people end up in prostitution. And I think for me it's clear. First, it is poverty, it is social injustice, it is social inclusion, it is inequality, it is no employment opportunities, and so on, intersectional discrimination, no idea for the future, no education.
Maria Noichl is a German member of the European Parliament with a group of the Progressive Alliance on Socialists and Democrats and Rapporteur on the report on prostitution.
Plus, there is a lack of safe and legal migration opportunities. This is sometimes the way in prostitution. And sometimes stand families behind, families who are say, you have to bring money for us. The outcome was clear. We would like to have a stop of sex buyers. We would like to have no possibility to buy sex, a criminalisation of sex buyers, but an end criminalisation of the women in prostitution. We need more prevention. We need more ways out of prostitution.
It encourages member states to adopt a common European approach to regulate prostitution. And it also frames prostitution as gender-based violence.
Silvia Ellena is Euractiv's journalist covering economy and social matters.
And it does not refer to sex work, because the basis of the report and the approach that the rapporteur, the Social Democrat MEP Maria Noichl, adopted for this report is really not to see prostitution as a job, as a normal job, and to try to eradicate prostitution from the society. So the idea of the report is to offer more exit strategies to people in prostitution and to also encourage the punishment of clients in an effort to reduce demand for prostitution.
So what does the European Parliament's vote tell us about the overall positions on sex work?
We had 531 MEPs voting this report. That means that 234 voted in favor, and a total of 297 voted against or abstained.
Sabrina Sanchez is director of the European Sex Workers Alliance and founder of Otras, the sex union trade in Spain.
This means that 56% of the MEPs didn't really approve this report. Yes, it passed, but what MEP Noichl claims is that she represents the majority, but we can see from these numbers that that is not true.
It does show that there is legislators, parliamentarians, that want to adopt reports without actually listening to the sex workers, and I find that quite sad.
Karen Melchior is a Danish member of the European Parliament with the Renew Europe group and focuses on equal rights.
The majority that has voted the report through has cherry-picked facts showing that criminalisation of the buyers of sex work decreases the amount of people being abused and trafficked and involved in sex work. However, as it's cherry picked to suit their arguments, it doesn't show the full picture.
For Sabrina, who has been involved in a full-service sex work for 18 years, the vote on the report weighs differently. So, does the vote affect sex workers in practice?
Any form of criminalization of our work harms sex workers per se. It has been demonstrated by many research from UNAIDS, from the World Health Organization, from Amnesty International, from different well-renamed international organizations, that asking for criminalizations, even if it's clients or third parties, in the end affects sex workers, because the argument is here that they don't criminalize or penalize directly sex workers, but it's if you criminalize or punish one of the parts of this commercial operation, that is what it is, like any other job in this capitalistic system. You are criminalizing the other side necessarily. It's impossible. It's an oxymoron, and it's not real, saying that you're decriminalizing one side while you're criminalizing the necessary other side of this operation. And it's damaging because this report was based in totally assumptions that are not come from reality, is not based in any credible research, and it's totally biased toward to fit into a certain narrative that only wants to address social economic questions and problems with the criminal code.
The report is urging member states to follow the Nordic model, a regulatory approach to sex work in Sweden, Ireland, and France. But what is the Nordic model, and why was it initially proposed in the report on prostitution regulation?
The Nordic model is a regulatory approach to sex work, which is currently in place in Sweden, Ireland, and France. And it is an approach that criminalizes the buyers of sex services as well as the third parties involved in organization of the selling of sex services. And it decriminalizes people in prostitution. So it decriminalizes the sex workers. And this is an approach that aims at reducing demand while also providing exit strategies for sex workers. It was initially included in the report, but then it was left out because it was not voted by the majority of MEPs during the plenary vote.
For MEP Noichl, the report could open a new discussion and perception of laws when it comes to sex work.
A reducing of the buyers is the same as reducing demand. And we have to understand that bias is the same wording as demand. And the reason why we have the worldwide situation for women, it's not only a situation in Europe, it's a situation worldwide. It could be start a new idea and a new thinking about prostitution. And I hope there are laws in the future, will bring laws in the future. For example, in Germany, I'm from Germany, and it's a shame for me to see the liberalization situation in Germany. It's a shame for me to see the situation for women in prostitution. We have to change the situation in Germany and in different other member states.
And the report has sparked an intense discussion about it. But what are some of the criticisms from both sex workers and certain MEPs regarding the report's preparation and content?
The main criticism is that this report wasn't done in a meaningful consultation with us. Yes, I personally had a meeting with MEP Noichl, but it's a little bit like the case, and I'm going to make a perfect parallelistic here, like this NFL coach from Miami Dolphins that sued the league for this. They must have interviews for black coaches to these positions, and they're just ticking the box. And this is the same thing. They just tick the box, and of course it's all recorded in the transparency record that yes, we had a meeting. But when you are telling them from your experience, from 17 years of doing this work every day, from working not only in Spain, but in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in France, and knowing more than 2,000 sex workers personally, a public representative that tells you that she doesn't believe you because, doesn't fit in her narrative. given her 0 days in experience on doing this job. That's not really a meaningful participation. This just putting us there to to cover the file and argument that yes we were consulted, yes, but our saying was not taken in any consideration. Also, another criticism for this report is the terrible and bad quality. How is it written? It's not taking in consideration studies from worker organization, from UNH about the effect on criminalising sex workers, and they are misinterpreting researches, for example, by Europol, were saying that where countries were regulated, trafficking has increased. And when you go to that research and read the letter, you realize it's not what they're saying, what Europol is saying. So this is an openly biased report that has no base for recommending what it's been recommending.
For MEP Melchior, there is an important issue with the report, as it doesn't distinguish between victims of trafficking, victims and abuse, and adults that voluntarily engage in sex work.
The report frames sex work as abuse in and of itself. And the problem is that the way that the report is written, it doesn't distinguish between victims of trafficking, victims and abuse, and adults that voluntarily engage in sex work. And I think this is quite patronizing towards people involved in sex work and prostitution. And just the use of the word prostitution rather than sex work is patronizing and a little bit sort of stigmatizing in and of itself. And that is one of the points that I find highly problematic with the report. It creates a frame of discussion that is patronizing and demeaning to the people that we're talking about.
And the intense discussion on the report has moved from the parliament to the feminist movement itself, with some viewing prostitution as exploitation, while others emphasize the right and recognition of sex workers.
The whole approach to prostitution creates a divide within the feminist movement. On the one side, prostitution is seen as exploitation of women's body, and some MEPs during the weeks preceding the plenary vote were really vocal about this issue. They, in particular, some really used also very vocal language. For instance, during the plenary debate preceding the vote, some MEPs said explicitly that prostitution is paid rape. And on the other side, you have women and sex workers and MEPs that really don't see prostitution necessarily as gender-based violence. They don't see it necessarily as violence. They recognize that there are some people who decide to work as sex workers, and they also argue that they should have all the rights as the social benefits, pension, and they disagree with the approach taken by the report.
And while the report lacks legislative impact, it serves as a potential legal basis for national parliaments to advocate for a specific approach to regulating sex work. At the same time, the report could influence the discourse and perspectives on societal policies and issues.
The report carries no legislative effect. It will not bring to a regulation. It will not bring to any specific laws. But it can be used as an argument, as a legal basis for maybe national parliaments, national members of parliaments to try to push for a regulation of prostitution with this specific approach. And at the same time, it's true that own initiative reports in the parliament, they do not have a very strong power on decision-making processes, but they do carry some power in terms of discourse, in terms of how we approach certain policies, certain issues in our society. And they could also influence other legislation that is currently being negotiated, such as the directive on violence against women.
However, at the center of the dialogue must be people involved in sex work, as they are often the most vulnerable group and are exposed to abuse.
There is a lot of stigma and there is a lot of prejudice regarding the discussion about sex work. And I think this report is a prime example of this. I would wish that we could move past this and actually look at the health rights activists and the human rights activists that have been working with sex workers and marginalized people across the world and victims of trafficking, and listen to what they have to say, how we protect and include the people involved in sex work better, rather than coming with our own presumptions and our own feelings about it and legislating on the basis of that.
And that's all for this week. I am Melchior, and this was Euractiv's Beyond the Byline podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up to our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, you can do so on your favorite podcasting app. Thank you for tuning in, and until next week.